Well, the federal government is backing down, withdrawing controversial amendments from its signature gun bill. Now, the amendments came late in the process and were criticized by many as targeting rifles and shotguns used by hunters and farmers. The Liberals said it was about banning assault-style weapons, but now Bill C-21 will move forward without those amendments.
What we acknowledge today is there was insufficient consultation, that more work had to be done to hear from Indigenous communities and from Canadians across the board. It is absolutely critical that this bill get adopted. It's important that we take handguns off our streets and assault-style weapons. And there's a couple of items that we still need to have conversations about.
Meanwhile, the Conservative leader is declaring a temporary victory, while the NDP is glad to move on with the bill with its original focus on handguns.
Today's humiliating climb down that we have forced Trudeau to make is a temporary pause in his plan to ban hunting rifles. He is doing this because he got caught, and because Canadians of all walks of life from across the country, law-abiding, decent, Indigenous Canadians, farmers, rural Canadians who follow the law, stood up with Conservatives and forced him to temporarily pause this plan.
You know, I don't know what reasoning the Liberals ultimately had for these amendments, but I definitely will underline the incompetence part of it. When those amendments were dropped, they single-handedly derailed any kind of progress we were making on the bill. And now that they are gone, we can begin to work on the more constructive elements of C-21.
With their thoughts, we're now joined by our Friday journalist panel. Bob Fife is the Ottawa bureau chief for the Globe and Mail. Catherine Lévesque is parliamentary reporter with the National Post. Nice to see both of you in studio.
Yeah, thanks for inviting us.
Happy to have you here. So listen, Catherine, I'll get you to start. You know, here you have the Liberals pulling back on these amendments, but did they really have any other choice? You know, the opposition to them built up very quickly, and they crossed party lines.
I mean, they had to do something. They had to pull it out. It was becoming too much of a contentious issue. But they also saw the opposition growing from the Conservatives to the NDP to even the Bloc. So I think, you know, something changed since Christmas. They saw the polls. I think they saw the numbers. The numbers are not very good for the Liberals right now. And so they had to do something to buy the peace, to kind of pull this issue out of the public sphere and to move on with their bill, their proposed bill. And yeah, to buy the peace with the NDP especially. Now, I expect the Conservatives to kind of still go on about this issue to try to kill the bill, but ultimately I think they had to retrieve those amendments. They didn't have a choice.
Mm-hmm. You know, Bob, were the Liberals overconfident here? Because, yeah, as we said, these amendments came late in the game. Did they not anticipate the pushback?
Look, they were trying to wedge the Conservatives. The Pierre Poilievre had just become leader. Let's wedge them on guns, because they did so effectively against Aaron O'Toole in the 2021 election campaign. But they didn't do their homework. They went after guns that are used by people who hunt, by people who are farmers, and most importantly, the Indigenous community who use these kind of rifles to go hunting for a variety of things. It blew up in their faces because somebody in Ottawa who doesn't know anything about hunting or Indigenous life or kind of guns that are used responsibly in hunting thought, oh, let's wedge the Tories and let's put these guns in. And it blew up in their faces. Yes, the Tories went after them hard, but boy, when I saw, you know, the NDP MPs from Northern Ontario, like Charlie Angus, come out and say, I'm against this, this is really bad, you knew that this was, they could not sustain this. So they got hosted by their own petard, if I want to say so, and now we're going to get back to the original intention of the legislation, which I don't think there's any disagreement, handguns.
Okay, well, pick up on that point then, Catherine. Will this now pass quickly? Will C-21 actually get passed quickly now that these amendments are gone?
I don't think so, because as Mark Collins said, I mean, they're going to be consulting now. They're going back to the consultations. I know the opposition just before Christmas, actually, in the committee, they were talking about consulting and actually doing a cross-country tour, you know, going in northern areas, going to meet with Indigenous communities to actually talk about this bill. So I get the feeling that there's still going to be this consultation happening. But, you know, ultimately, I do think this bill if there are no more controversial amendments, I think it's going to pass, because certainly I think the NDP said they were okay with it. Now I think the Bloc will also want to support it ultimately.
Which brings me to what they were trying to do with the amendments, Bob, because, you know, to listen to the Conservative leader, he says this is just a temporary reprieve. He expects the Liberals to come back, again, warning hunters and Indigenous populations about the amendments. So what do you make of the future of those intents?
Look, I don't think that they've learned their lesson here. They've got their fingertips burned on the stove. They're not going to bring back like banning of guns that are used by people who hunt or fish or Indigenous people. But there are obviously rifles that are used for hunting that look like machine guns or out of Rambo, and I don't think the Tories want to defend those rifles. Good luck, because people in the country take a look at some of those guns and they go, whoa, that doesn't look like a hunting rifle to me. That looks like a rifle you go into a shopping mall and kill people. So they'll be successful if they bring those kind of amendments in. But they just have to be really careful that there is a law-abiding segment of the Canadian population that hunt and fish, and they need guns for if they're on farms or in remote communities, or if they're Indigenous, which is crucial to their life. They need those kind of weapons, and they have to think that through.
Okay, well, let's shift focus now and talk about Tuesday, because of course next Tuesday the First Ministers will gather here in Ottawa. Healthcare funding, of course, on the table. What do you expect out of that meeting, Catherine? Are we looking at a wholesale deal here on healthcare funding? Are we looking at sideline agreements? What do you think will come out of that meeting?
I think we're going to be talking about numbers. You know, that's really the crux of this whole thing right now. I know this week the premiers came out and said we expect healthcare to be funded by 35%. You know, that means $28 billion extra dollars every year. I don't think they're going to be getting that. I think, you know, they wish they could have that, but I don't think that's going to be happening. But we also saw the premiers complain a little bit about the fact that they haven't had any proposal yet from the federal government. So I expect the federal government to try to come there with numbers, to try to talk about this, but also get them to try to agree to conditions. And ultimately, I mean, I think we might actually see some separate deals with different provinces, because, you know, right now there's still this unity between the premiers, but as we've seen in the past, this can quickly disappear.
Yeah, well, of course, in November, the health ministers came together with the federal government. Nothing came of that. What's your expectation for Tuesday?
Well, I think there's going to be a lot of money on the table, but all of it is not going to be part of the Canada Health Transfer. A big chunk, I don't know how much, but there will be a significant amount of money that will go to bilateral agreements, because every province has particular interest. In the case of Ontario, for example, they're talking a 10-year deal with $70 billion on the table. Some of it obviously in Canada Health Transfer, but the other in terms of building long-term care facilities and home care. Every province has, you know, people in the Yukon and Northwest Territories or British Columbia have different medical needs. So these bilateral agreements are going to have to be negotiated. But there's going to be agreement. The Prime Minister is not meeting with the First Ministers to walk away without failure. And there has been some significant concessions made from the premiers, including the Premier of Quebec, in terms of data modernization, so that, you know, doctors can access your health records, or you can access your health records. The mental health, money for mental health. There's the fact that we're going to reduce credentials. They are agreeing to reduce credentials so people can move from one province to another if they need as a nurse or a doctor. So there's a lot of things that are going on, and that's because Ottawa has held out a lot of money, and the provinces have started to say, okay, maybe we can agree to this.
Yeah, that's interesting, though, because you say a lot of money, and this picks up on your point, because here you do have the provinces. They want billions of dollars more, but, you know, there are, I guess, two competing interests here for the federal government. On the one hand, how much wiggle room do they actually have fiscally, considering that we heard Chrystia Freeland already warn that there's not a lot of money left. But what is the political price they pay if they don't cough up some money to meet the healthcare needs, given the crisis, the different crises that we're seeing right across the country?
They have to cough up some money. I think, you know, if they're going to be using any money in the next budget, is going to be for healthcare, but also to, you know, for electric vehicles, to, you know, respond to the United States Inflation Reduction Act. But certainly for healthcare, they have to do something. But at the same time, they expect to have results in the medium term, in the long term. You know, the federal government, I think, rightly so, doesn't want to give billions extra in money just to have premiers give that back in checks or, you know, in tax breaks for their citizens. So, of course, they have to give some money, but again, I really do not think it's going to be an extra $28 billion per year. You know, Jean-Yves Duclos has already said, well, look, we're already giving some extra money. That's because it's following inflation and the current transfer. For this year, I think it's $49 billion, so that is a significant amount. But yes, I do expect some more money for some long-term investments and results.
But there's no room for failure here.
Yeah.
You know,
well, the Liberals campaign on healthcare, right?
Yeah,
they distinguish themselves
not just
on that.
I mean, the premiers are responsible for healthcare. Ottawa does provide a significant amount of funding, but you know, the Canadians, the healthcare system is on the verge of collapse here. Mm-hmm. And if they walk out of a meeting with failure, people are going to be out in the streets with pitchforks against both the federal government and the provinces. So they've got to come out of this meeting saying, we're going to fix this. It's not going to happen overnight. Clearly, it's going to take a long, over a period of time, but we are committed to doing so.
Yeah, millions of Canadians without a primary care doctor, people watching this very closely across the country, as will we come Tuesday. But for now, Bob, Catherine, thank you for this. Really appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Thank you.